Hi folks, I'm Mike Medea, Head of Education Programs at the American Philosophical Society, or the APS. Haven't watched one of our career chats yet? That's okay. If you have, thanks for being part of our community. If you need a quick introduction to the APS though, be sure to check out our website or follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, we're here to discuss the many careers offered by an organization like the APS. As a museum, research library, archive, and membership society, we have great staff who do work ranging from administration to publications. Career Chats showcases these staff members and introduces you to careers you might not have considered before. I ask the staff members a series of questions during these interviews. If you've seen the page for the series and have a question about a certain career, be sure to submit one. We'd love to hear from you. Now that you have some basics, enjoy learning about APS staff and their careers. Hi folks, thanks for joining us today on Career Chats. I am extremely delighted and extremely excited to have a special guest on today. I have Patrick Spiro, Director and Librarian of the APS Librarian Museum. And you know, this is the 4th episode of Season 2 of Career Chats. We're allowed back in our spaces for a little bit at least, so we decided to give a special treat and we're going to switch up the question format. But also, as you probably noticed, Patrick has a box right next to him with some interesting objects. So we'll start with the first question, which is usually our last question. What's one APS object that really demonstrates your work?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. This is actually my favorite APS story, and I think it tells a lot about what the APS's library, what we have, what we do, why we exist, and why I think my job is so fun and exciting. So I came to APS way back in 2009, almost 11 years ago. I just finished my PhD. I studied early American history and the Revolution. And my job at the APS was to survey all of the early American materials. I had the awesome task of touching every collection before 1850 and going through the letters, the manuscripts, and then creating what at the time was going to be the APS's first digital guide to their early American collections. And I have to tell you, as you probably learned through these other sessions, the collection here is absolutely remarkable. I mean, we have a rich early American collection, one of the largest collections of endangered languages in the world, and we continue to collect. We have the papers of 7 Nobel laureates. So a lot of it was really exciting. I was touching some incredible documents that kind of captured the founding of the nation, our history as a city, so much. But we have 13 million pages of manuscripts. And some of it is also pretty dry.
Right, and that's just manuscripts, right? That's just
right.
The handwritten stuff. That's not even the books that they're written.
Yeah. So my job was, I couldn't touch any of the printed materials, only the manuscripts, which we separate things by manuscript and printed material here. I was going through this one collection, and I was moving alphabetically, so this is right in the middle. It was called the Hare-Willing Family Papers. And some of the stuff was really interesting. Robert Hare was kind of a pioneering scientist, a civic leader, and all these things, but this was a massive collection, and I don't think I can convey how large it was. It was several shelves long. And this one collection was actually just their checkbooks for the family. And so my job, though, was to touch everything here, and I had to do my job. So at one point, I was going through, if I can open it here. It's going to steal. Actually, this is it. I'm sorry. This was it. You can see, I don't know if you can read it here, but it says expenditures and receipts, 1845 to 1858 for Robert Hare. And as you can see, when I say it was dry, I mean that literally. It's a very old leather account book. It's just filled with reams and reams. I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but just trust me, it's a lot of just entries on what they're spending their money on. But as I was going through it, I had to thumb through everything, and all of a sudden on my lap fell this document. I don't know if you can see it online, but I think we scanned it, Mike, if you want to show folks what it actually looked like. It fell on my lap as a recent PhD. But you can see here, it's got this great wax seal. It has some burned edges. And it says it's entrusted to my faithful servant, to my faithful Captain Brown, is what it says, Jean Lafitte. Okay? Now, if you don't know, Jean Lafitte was the last pirate of the Caribbean. He was killed in the 1820s. He had actually fought alongside Andrew Jackson as a privateer. And there was this legend of his lost treasure. So I have this on my lap, and I slowly and carefully open up this very intriguing document. And what do I discover? But a treasure map. And if you can see here, to find the treasure, and then it gives you these detailed instructions on, where to find this lost treasure of Jean Lafitte. As I'm sure you can imagine, I was very intrigued as to what this was that I had just literally landed on my lap. I had to do the work of a historian, which was to piece together the story and figure out what this document was all about. And I think that's really what, why libraries exist. It's the work historians do. And as I pieced together this story, what became pretty evident is this was not really the treasure map for Jean Lafitte, unfortunately for me.
Which is disappointing, but extremely exciting at the same time to know that somebody kind of tried to forge this.
What really, excites me about it is that once I found out the real story, to me, yes, it would have been great to find all this lost treasure, but the real story is, just as fascinating as the document itself. So it turns out that Robert Hare was a chemist who invented what we would think of today as the modern blowtorch. Right? And he was, he had grandchildren, and Jean Lafitte had been the last pirate of the Caribbean. And after he died, he kind of become the Johnny Depp of his era, where there were all these children's books written about him. And so I started to piece this together. This book that I found it in came from, if you remember, 1845 to 1858, right? So that means that this is long after Jean Lafitte's death, but at a time when he had become this kind of larger-than-life historical fictional figure. Robert Hare invented the blowtorch, so these perfectly burned edges, So once you pieced it together, you had the story of Robert Hare, this forgotten chemist, who made a major contribution. The story of Jean Lafitte, the last pirate of the Caribbean, both in life, but also in death, and how his death, he turned into something else. So for me, this is exactly what archives and libraries are about, like all these hidden stories that are buried in the 13 million pages, 2.5 miles of shelf space that we have. And we preserve this material so that scholars and researchers and our own librarians and archivists can discover these stories and share them with a wider audience. So, that is my favorite story, and also I think captures, why it is I'm here and what I try and do.
Right, and I always love that story because there are so many layers to it, and like you said, discovery is such a key role in this story. Where if you think about just looking through those checkbooks or thinking about just doing research, sometimes it sounds like it could be an extremely boring thing, especially if you say you have to survey all of these documents, but you never know what you're going to find, even if you're looking intentionally. So it's really great to have a fun, lighthearted discovery story like that embedded in something like this.
Yeah, and then my own mind goes, I'm kind of dismissive about it being a checkbook, but for the right scholar, here's another gold mine. If you want to uncover what it is a family in the 19th century, a middle class, upper middle class family, are spending money on, right there you have a complete record of it. So even though it wasn't of interest to me, it still has utility to the right scholar who knows how to make sense of this material. And really that's why we do what we do, to preserve stuff and have people make these type of discoveries.
Yeah, because you never know what's going to be of use to somebody at some point down the line. So it's important to collect all the things, no matter how boring they might sound to you, they're going to be of use to somebody eventually, ideally. So that's fantastic. And I know you had a second object. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I think I've talked long enough. Maybe
all right.
We'll
get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Yeah. So if you don't mind, could you just quickly reintroduce yourself again with your name and your title at the APS?
Sure. So my name is Patrick Spiro. I'm the librarian of the American Philosophical Society, which means I'm the director of the Society's library and its museum. The Society has been around, I'm sure, since 1743. The library itself was kind of formed after the American Revolution, as the institution itself began to really reestablish itself and lay a foundation that has been permanent. A library developed first to serve members, but now has evolved to really be one of the most distinguished collections of an independent research library in America and maybe even the world.
Yeah. So it's a big, hefty job. So if you ever have to explain that to either your friends or even like, so let's say your kids' teachers, how do you quickly explain that to somebody who might not know what the APS is?
Yeah, I have this phrase that I say I run a research library, but I often get a quizzical response to that, because what's a research library? It's a special collection. It has a number of different users, but it is a very particular type of collection. It's these manuscripts, and to some people they're hard to access, they're hard to understand, they're hard to make sense of, they're hard to find the utility. In some ways, historians, scholars, their job is to take this material and translate it for the public, to be able to tell the stories that are contained in here. So I often say that a research library is actually a laboratory for the humanities. This is where scholars conduct original research and make discoveries, just like that map I showed you, but a whole range of other ones that people do in our collections. And so when you walk into the reading room, it's cold, it's quiet, there are all these security measures, and there's somebody sitting at this desk with this book in front of them. But what's actually happening is incredible. It's dynamic. This is a laboratory. They're making discoveries that they're going to share with the rest of the world. And so when I try and explain what a research library is, that's how I do so.
Nice, I like that. I might steal some of that eventually. So you have two titles in some sense, right? Librarian and director. And I think both of them have certain perceptions of either being that kind of person going, shh, I'm talking in here, or director just being this kind of like massive head of an organization who's a lone wolf in some sense. So does your work tend to be solo or as a team?
Yeah, I mean, it's a team. The library and museum have a staff of maybe 30. There are a whole bunch of other departments at the APS that we have to work with, whether it's the publications department, whether it's with members, whether it's with research and grants. So we're a piece of a much larger puzzle. And also, the primary job, I think, is to be a facilitator, to make sure that the conversations are happening that can make the organization realize its fullest potential. So, one of the things that I try and do, if not me, but to encourage others to make sure that they're having what we call cross-departmental discussions and coordinations. So really, in some way, you're a team leader, is your job.
Yeah, and I love that too, because I think even with Bob Hauser's interview on this last season, it's a good point to make that if you are a director of something, you're rarely working solo. So that it's a good note for anybody watching this, that if you would think long-term enough, your work eventually becomes as part of a team, no matter where you kind of are. So it's important to know that moving forward for a lot of people, I think. So thank you for that, Patrick.
The other thing that I'd like to say too is that it's interesting. Often I find that the people that get to do the most fun are not me. It's people like you that get to have all these interviews with interesting people and others.
Right, you get to facilitate the fun in some way, right? You just get to make sure that we have the time to do the fun things, basically.
Yeah, it's I think more than anything, my job is to make sure that people have the support they need to do what they want to do, what we want to do as a team.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a kind of like a long-term-ish question, I guess, but how did you learn about or first hear about this kind of field of work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it really gets to how do you have the career that you have, or the career that I've had. It's been a very strange, non-linear path, as I think most people's careers are, and most people should realize that that's what their careers most likely will be. What I've often pursued, thinking about this interview and some of the questions you've asked me to think about is, what has kind of been the thing that has driven me. And the first is to always pursue jobs that I find interesting and that will keep my brain working. And the other is to always continue to learn. learn new things, learn how to do new things. And I don't mean book learning necessarily, or even exclusively or primarily. So, how did I come to this career? I graduated high school. I always seemed to do well in history, which was simply at that point, remembering names and dates so you could pass the AP exam. I went to college. I majored in history again because it seemed like I had a natural affinity for it. I didn't really think much about it. In fact, I kind of assumed that at some point I was going to switch to be, some sort of marketing or business major, because that's what everybody else seemed to do. And in fact, my entire, surroundings and my family and social life had all been, focused on business. So I assumed I was going to enter, business world, whatever that means in whatever way, but I figured it out. And along the way in college, I realized taking advanced history courses that being a historian wasn't just about memorizing names and dates and facts, though those are important, but also you got to do original research, to dive into primary sources and to offer your own interpretation of what happened and why it matters. And to me, that was an incredibly liberating experience. It really changed my idea of what history was about. But I still kind of, that was interesting, but, I'm just.
And there's a lot within that to kind of unpack, right? So the nonlinear path and even thinking like, oh yeah, I'll get around to something like that, or I'll figure it out eventually. Those are important things for viewers to take stock of, because careers are a long game in many senses, and they can change over time. They can bounce around even within a single year. If you want to think about it, if you're an undergrad or in high school, you can think about multiple different careers at many different times. But having your eye on things that, like you said, keep your interest and keep your brain functioning and moving and keep that engaged are highly important things. So that can mean a lot of different things to different people, but I'm happy that meant history and being a librarian for you. So I like all of that. So I guess for your job in particular, what would you say are the education and experience expectations?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that by, continuing on that nonlinear path from college. I still thought I wanted to go to business. I did an honors thesis, and my advisor during it was the first time he broached the idea of going to graduate school. Hadn't even been on my radar screen, and I didn't know what it meant. But I had kind of saw what it meant to be a professor and thought, well, this would be my dream. I'd love to go become a professor at a small liberal arts school where I could get, young minds who maybe hadn't thought about history in the way that, and had the same discovery I had, but still I had kind of business, looming over my shoulder. So I ended up working for 2 years at a company called America Online, which at the time was, in the midst of the dot-com boom, was thriving, was a major internet company. So I couldn't have asked for a better experience to see if that was the right path for me. And the whole time I was thinking about going to graduate school, because that's where I felt like, most captured my interest. And so I went to graduate school with the idea of becoming a college professor at a small liberal arts school. And, along the way in graduate school, I started taking on more and more what are called public history projects. I worked at a semi-permanent position at the National Constitution Center, a kind of part-time position while going to graduate school, where I helped them organize their teacher workshops. And that was just I had never thought about that. I'd never been exposed to that, but it was such a great experience to kind of take history and again, translate it for these, enthusiastic teachers who would then bring it into their classroom. And it felt such a sense of accomplishment to organize something like that, to see it go off well and smoothly. So I started thinking, well, is being a professor the right path for me? And throughout my graduate school career, I continued to pursue what you might call project management positions. I worked at the David Library as the historian of the David Library, which is essentially the same position I have here, but just on a smaller scale. I even had my own, I was thinking about this morning, I opened my own consulting business where I consulted on public history projects around town in Philadelphia, and thought, well, maybe I could give it a go as an independent consultant on public history projects. So to answer your question, what type of skills did I develop myself were a lot of kind of what you might call administrative skills, skills in public history, that was kind of inadvertent again, because I realized I was interested in something and I learned a lot by running these programs. I can't tell you how much I'm always learning how things work or how to make things work well, and how I got so much enjoyment out of that as much as I do diving into primary sources. So I went off and I taught for 4 years at Williams College, which again was like AOL, this great college. I couldn't have asked for any better of a place to have worked at. But the whole time I'm there, I was thinking about my dream job would be to be the librarian of the APS, because I'd seen what the APS was, what its collection was like, what the librarian did, and seemed to pull together all of these skills I had kind of inadvertently learned and acquired during my graduate school, because I decided not to just stick down a linear path.
Oh God, I don't even know where to begin with pulling out strands from that. So I think there's a part here about curiosity whenever you get involved in things, or when you get exposed to other kind of careers or even tasks or programs or jobs, that you just kept exploring them. You kept asking questions about, how does that work? Can I do that? Can I get involved in that? And that's a massive part of discovering a career in the first place, is just being curious about what other people do and how they do it, and the pleasure that people get out of achieving their careers. Which is always massively important. You should have a positive feedback loop with your careers. Please keep that in mind. Have a positive feedback loop with your careers. But then also and this is a great trend throughout the season, of the continued experience, where you're never going to say that I didn't learn anything while you were doing the marketing for the America Online. You learned a lot with that, and people build their careers over a long period of time. So sticking to the things that you learned early on is a massively important thing too. So nothing ever really goes to waste, as long as you look at it with a kind of positive view. So thank you for those great responses. I'm sure I missed 5 strands.
Well, I mean, at AOL, like you said, it was not a lost experience at all. I mean, I can't tell you how much I think I benefited from taking 2 years off, rather than going straight to graduate school, where I got exposed to a professional work environment. I kind of understood what it meant to have a manager, a supervisor. I kind of understood, what it meant to have a job, and those were things that I've been able to take throughout. But what really helped me when I went to graduate school, when I approached graduate school, is this is an education, but it's also a job that's part of a career trajectory, and to think that in that way. And I think that's one of the reasons I also took on all these other tasks on the side as a graduate student, which ultimately gave me the skills that have helped me move into this position. Same as being a teacher. One of the things that I learned at Williams, these are these small seminars, and you have to facilitate conversations amongst small groups, some of whom maybe not everybody is comfortable sharing, some aren't. But your job is to be a facilitator of these conversations, and that again is something that I've realized actually has a lot of management that you can apply to a traditional management job as well.
Yeah, and within that too, even is the small scale, big scale, or soft skill, harder skill things of. I think a soft skill is being able to facilitate those conversations and knowing how to kind of read people and see how you can move those conversations forward. And then the kind of hard tack skills of just basic administration. Like if you have a chance to learn any of these skills in internships, or just by working as like a manager of even like a coffee shop, these are massively important skills of knowing how to function in a formal environment. Never dismiss any of that. You can learn that from anything and everything practically. So that's another great point, Patrick. So it's a bit of a harder question to answer possibly, but what are the pros and cons of a job like yours?
Yeah, so I mean, the job is has endless potential to be exciting. The amount of, it's hard for people that don't know, all that we do to realize how much exciting research happens at our library, and to see all of the fellows. We have over 40 fellows come from around the world every year, more than that probably, to do research in our collections. And they are making new discoveries, and they're sharing them with us, and we get to see and learn from them. We're able to mount, conferences and programs that bring together conversations that, continue long after they're held here. We're publishing volumes that kind of crystallize this and will shape knowledge into the future. All of that is extraordinarily exciting. I mean, I think the biggest con for me is the fact that, I'm trained as a historian. I've written a couple of books. I've gone through this collection, as I said, in incredible detail, and I know the stories in there. And those skills that I've acquired sometimes are the hardest ones to use. I finding the time to conduct research and even harder to find the time to write and write well is a challenge.
Yeah, I like that it's a through line with my conversation with Adriana last week about if you have the skill and you are a historian or you are a historian of science and this is something that you love, being able to do that all the time isn't always a reality sometimes, especially when you have a full-time career. So balancing that is it's a massively difficult thing for everybody to think about, where if you do go forward, get a PhD, thinking about jobs that might balance which ones you're more interested in is either the pursuit of the academics purely and the scholarship purely, or the pursuit of kind of furthering others in their career in a position like yours. Is a good thing to keep in mind. So especially for you as a director, I think it's good that you have a bird's eye view of things normally anyway, right? So thinking for your perspective, how do you see fields like mine, fields like everybody else that involved the APS changing over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so I think, when it comes to libraries, there's no doubt that technology is going to change and affect what we do. I don't think it's going to change what we fundamentally are. What we are, again, going back to my first answer, we're places where we want to facilitate people conducting research, and technology is going to only make our material more accessible and usable by a wider group of people with less barriers. 20 years ago, if you wanted to use the APS's collections, you had to find a way to get into Philadelphia. If you need to stay overnight, there are all these challenges. And one of the things that we're doing rapidly here is digitizing our material. We're never going to be able to do 13 million pages. So when people ask me, "Are you digitizing all your stuff?" That's not going to happen. So I think there's always going to be a reason for the reading room. But technology is definitely reshaping the work we do. Where I think libraries, especially independent ones like us, are going with in terms of digital projects, is digitization is kind of with us. That revolution happened maybe 10 years ago. We're kind of living in the digitized world. And what we're trying to do here is actually what I think is the next step, which is to develop digital projects, what are called digital humanities projects, that showcase what you can do with these collections and how you can manipulate them and what this data tells us about the past. So not just digitizing, but then helping interpret and showcase what this material tells us about the past. And that's where we're trying to go. And the other thing that I think for libraries in particular is we need to be spaces for conversation. Research libraries aren't passive sites. It's not, people aren't just coming here to do research. We want to be a site of active exchange of ideas and research and promoting the knowledge that's contained in our collections. And so even if a lot of libraries, are, particularly larger ones, maybe at universities, are emphasizing less space for books but more spaces for conversations, I think that also is a place where libraries are going, and it's not necessarily a contradiction. That libraries have always been about ideas and exchange of ideas, and so being a facilitator of those is something that's going to continue to do, maybe in different form in the future.
Yeah, and I love how you started that off too, with the difference between what you do versus what you are, and where technology and time will always change how you do something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that an identity like the APS will have to change massively over time. If we look back, at least, was it 277 years at this point in time, the identity is still pretty intact, and that's a good thing. That shows that technology and time don't always change everything in a good way. So we trucked through a good chunk of the questions. So I want to wrap things up with that final question of, say I'm a student doing an informational interview with you, what questions do you love being asked about your job? Are there any questions I should avoid? Email pet peeves, basically any professional advice for doing an informational interview with somebody in a position like yours.
I actually thought that was a question you wanted to ask me off the record. I didn't know it was actually part of the interview.
No, I learn from it every single time, just like I learned from Bob's.
So I haven't thought about that at all. I think what I love talking about is what I've already talked about, which is you have to pursue a lot of paths. You have to be flexible. Where you think you are, where you want to go, it's going to change and evolve. When I went into graduate school, I thought I wanted to be a professor at a small liberal arts college. That was my dream. I mean, it was clear. And again, I had the incredible fortune to have that experience to test it. But in that process, between when I had that vision and got it, I had changed. I had experiences that changed my own views about my future and my path. The other thing, when I talk to students and they ask about my job or jobs in this field, is you also have to be honest about what it looks like. There are not a lot of jobs out there, which is why flexibility matters even more. I think for anybody pursuing graduate school, whether it's a master's or a PhD, you need to define what it means to be a historian broadly. Becoming a professor cannot and should not be the end-all be-all. There are a lot of other careers out there in which you can use your skill, your knowledge, your expertise, whether they're in library, museums, or in consulting, in government, just to make sure that you are open and to think of being in the history field in the same way that maybe a lawyer thinks about being a lawyer. When you enter law school, you might know what type of lawyer you're going to become, but there's also a whole range of different types of lawyers you can become and you may become for a whole range, number of reasons. The same when you enter the history or the nonprofit or the library field. This might be the type of librarian you want, or the type of library you want to work at, but there are a lot of different types of libraries and librarianship out there. And to think about your career as widely as possible.
Yeah, and that's a massively important thing too, if you think about it from, like you mentioned, the master's student or even the graduate student perspectives, where there's still always time to learn about different career pathways. In high school, it might be more narrow, like thinking I want to be a historian, but then when you get to grad school or even undergrad, thinking about what that actually means is what that time is for, and exploring that in depth and knowing that there are multiple pathways for each of these choices is a great note to end on. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us for Career Chats today. It's been a wild ride learning about your past. Getting to start off with an object has been a fantastic way to kickstart this conversation, and learning about how you view the next 10 years. So thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you.
Great, and please remember that we record Career Chats every Tuesday and then we air them every Thursday. Check out the web pages to see if you want to submit any questions, and we hope to see you for the next video.
Thanks.